Welcome. We're ready.
Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Gigi and I am the founding director of the Rodham Institute, which is dedicated to improving health equity in Washington, D.C. We're housed at the GW School of Medicine and Health Sciences. And I'm delighted to talk about a topic that is difficult to talk about. Before I bring on our esteemed guests, just wanted to give you just a quick update about the COVID, because although, thank God, only 14% of deaths and hospitalizations are among children, because the Delta variant is so much more contagious, the percents are not changing, but the absolute numbers are higher. And the number one group that is impacted by deaths and hospitalizations are Black and Latino boys. We're not sure why that is, but we do know that adults being vaccinated is the best way to protect children, because not all children yet can be vaccinated, right? If they're less than 12 years old. We also know that pregnant women should be vaccinated, where unfortunately I've heard some awful, heartbreaking stories about pregnant moms and their babies both dying because they were not vaccinated. But you know, the topic at hand today is about domestic violence. And earlier in the COVID pandemic, we talked about how domestic violence, especially because people, were isolated, were quarantined, we're spending more time at home, the mental health issues. I don't know about you, but I am just tired of having to mask up and, you know, the ups and downs of everything that's happening in COVID, and frankly, everything else that's happening in our world right now, all the challenges that we're faced with, unfortunately has led to huge increases in numbers of both child abuse and violence, family violence, and woman and man violence. And so this is such an important topic, and we've got two wonderful guests that I'd like to bring on now. First, our beloved Pastor Webb from the Temple of Praise, and just want to make a quick plug for her book. She wrote a book about her COVID experiences, and it's called Dark Shadows: My Journey with COVID. And then the other guest is Ms. Hogan, who is from DC Safe. So I think we'll actually start off with you, Ms. Hogan, and you can just introduce yourself and tell us about your organization.
Absolutely. So I'm Kylie Hogan. I'm the Crisis Response Team Director for DC Safe. We are a domestic violence nonprofit that really focuses on providing crisis intervention services for people who are experiencing domestic violence. So we focus on kind of the first step and what is a journey in leaving those relationships that are unsafe. I've been doing domestic violence work for over 10 years now and been with DC Safe for about 7 years serving the DC population.
Thank you for joining us. Pastor Webb, can you introduce yourself, please? Although you're known throughout the city, but for those of you that did not have the pleasure yet.
Yes, I'm Pastor Deborah Webb, and I am an all-around Renaissance woman when you talk about taking care of people spiritually, physically, and mentally. Amen. But as a pastor and a leader, I've been doing this just about 35 years. So we are very invested in health and wellness as well as spirituality.
Thank you. And before we get started, I don't know if either one of the panelists know this, but actually I've written about domestic violence. I've lectured about it. I have a book chapter about it. And I will share a little bit about my personal story. Because when I was married, I was not physically abused, but I was terrorized by my now ex-husband. And so let's start off with you, Ms. Hogan, because I think sometimes people think about domestic violence as people being hit. So can we talk a little bit about that definition? Can you help us out with that? what constitutes
Mm.
domestic violence?
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you brought up the terrorization kind of within that context can come from other places. The definition of domestic violence that we tend to use most at the core of our mission is one of a situation where one member of a relationship is trying to gain power and control over the other people, or over the other person. So certainly for most of our clients, there is a physical element to it, but there's so much more that goes into trying to take that control and dominate the other person. So psychological tactics, convincing people that they're worthless, they're never going to get anywhere, that this is the best place they could be, being controlling of their behavior, dominating who gets to spend what funds and how and where people can go. We often say that the domestic violence, or it's kind of the violence piece of it is what might hem it together sometimes, but often those more mental health related, psychological, emotional aspects are what really stay with people a long time and make situations like these often so hard to leave. So it's really about that desire to try to make someone subservient to you and control their daily life that we look at as so critical.
Mm-hmm. And the beginning part is oftentimes, at least in intimate partner relationships, and they can be men with women, women with women, men with men. We will tend to use language today that it's a woman that's a victim and a man that's a perpetrator, just because that's the more common. But the reality is that women can be perpetrators, and actually there's a lot of shame that is associated when men are victims, a lot of shame. And so, Pastor Webb, what have you been seeing since COVID began in terms of intimate partner violence or psychological abuse? What are you seeing?
Definitely an escalation. There has been an exacerbation of those kinds of problems. And therefore, it creates challenges for churches because, first of all, you want to give your people a safe exit. And with COVID, where could they go? So it was very challenging, to try to give people a way out, because when they're there and they're locked in with the perpetrator and they're saying you can't come out, then what do you do? And from a spiritual perspective, of course, we pray, and pray harder, right? That they stay alive. But then you have to do some practical things. You have to start collaborating with others and try to create an exit strategy for them that they could get out. And unfortunately, we're still seeing a rise, an uprise in domestic violence during this pandemic. But that is what we've been seeing, and just praying and letting people know there are some alternatives. Reach out to us, reach out to your leaders, reach out to your community leaders, and of course, giving them the domestic violence hotline. Call the hotline and try to get an exit strategy. Don't allow COVID to keep you locked into this abusive relationship, because there's still ways to get it done. It may be more challenging, but we can still do it.
Yeah, I think one of the sort of the most difficult things is that you have somebody who supposedly you love and they love you, and then it becomes this whole, psychological just trip, really, because slowly first there is the isolation from friends and family, and then the controlling behavior, and then I think the really damaging part is just bringing you down. And so, Ms. Hogan, you talked about sort of the feelings of worthlessness that a person can feel, and the isolation. So, before we sort of go into that, what about you and DC Safe in terms of the numbers that you're seeing?
Oh, we've definitely seen an uptick in the middle of COVID. We tend to operate as a referral based service. So we get a lot of our clients through other organizations where a client maybe has called the police, or they've shown up at the hospital, they're talking to their social worker. And just the people in need and the amount of outreach we've got has been so much higher. And particularly to kind of piggyback off what you guys were saying about COVID, part of the real challenge, not just in the isolation of being afraid to go somewhere, is that it has been a scramble for so many core institutions and organizations to try to redo services or change their strategies. And just figuring out how to get connected to something as simple as changing your benefits has been a major hurdle, and something that maybe might have been easier in the past and now becomes a much, much scarier thing because you're just not sure what to do anymore.
Yeah. That Pastor Webb, you look like you were going to add something.
No, I was agreeing with her, Dr. Gigi, in that, her organization definitely seeing an uptick, and we're seeing it everywhere because it's so prevalent in every community, right? It doesn't matter socioeconomic status. We're seeing it everywhere. And I like that we even open up with, it's not only physical abuse, people are being emotionally abused, mentally abused, and just, it's a systematic pattern, right? A pattern. I need to keep my power and control. And so, systemically, we're going to do this. And if it seems that there's going to be a problem where I'm going to lose some of my power, then thereby we have the abuse.
Next, what I'd like to do is talk about myth or fact. And first, myth or fact, Ms. Hogan, this only happens with poor women in, mostly predominantly Black and brown communities. Myth or fact?
Absolutely myth. This happens everywhere. Certain communities have more assets to hide it from the public eye than others, but it happens everywhere, and we know that for sure. Unfortunately, I do believe a couple of the homicides that have happened this year related to domestic violence have happened in the more affluent areas of DC.
Yeah. So the thing of when you're living in closer quarters, you might know about what's happening more easily, and also the services that you can access are more public services, right? Whereas if you have the means, there may be acres between one house and another. You may be able to call somebody very discreetly. That doesn't diminish from the shame and the damage that happens. But certainly this is an equal opportunity problem. Pastor Webb, talk to us. Myth or fact, this only happens among older people?
Oh, that's certainly a myth. That's certainly a myth. It's happening with younger as well as older people. And all of our interaction that we're seeing, especially during COVID, it seems to be even more younger ones, and having mental health crises and taking out their frustration and their anger, their anxiety and everything on their partners, whether they're married or not married. And even in Dr. Gigi, LGBTQ community, a lot of anxiety with them and a lot of abuse. And so we see amongst congregants as well as others in the community that is also the younger generation.
Myth or fact, if a person, let's say a woman, is in a violent relationship, she should just leave. Myth or fact, Ms. Hogan?
There's a little bit of both in there.
Okay.
Certainly we want to see that people are able to get out, but we also want people to be able to do that safely. And I think, unfortunately, often people are going to take a couple tries before they really know what they're getting into and feel very comfortable leaving. So I think when we throw around language like she should just leave, we're actually doing a disservice to a lot of people in the community and making it seem easier than it really is. It takes time, it takes knowledge of what it's going to look like on the other side, and it takes support. And so certainly we would love everybody to be able to just leave, but we know that that's a process and it's something people need to plan and prepare for, and they should, for their own good.
So what a lot of folks don't realize is in the violent situations where somebody is killed, 75% of people who are killed, mostly women, are killed in the setting of trying to leave. So for those of us that are the support people, we have to be careful that we don't make, we don't get somebody killed. So Pastor Webb, when you are counseling, a person, what are some of the phrases or the language or that you use when you're counseling them?
First of all, I want the people to know that this is not your fault, because we
Right.
find that many people, they blame themselves. You know, I said something wrong or something. So the first thing, this is not your fault and this is unacceptable. And now what we have to do, and it does take a village, we need to develop, create a plan and execute a safety plan for you to get out. And so along with prayer, because we're going to always back it and seal it with prayer. But then we have to develop an exit plan, and we get all of the community involved, whether it's therapists, social workers, you know, a whole cadre, even your physicians. We need to begin to develop an exit plan that you can get out safely. Because what we're finding too, Dr. Gigi, is, you know, the temple works closely with law enforcement as well, you know, is that a lot of these women, even younger women who they're told to go and take out the protective order, that even after they put into the law enforcement officers for the protective order, that these gentlemen still come back and they disregard the protective order, and unfortunately, the women lose their lives. And so we've seen so much, Dr. Gigi. I think one of the greatest things is their self-worth is just battered. And so it's like for them a challenge, a mental challenge. Well, maybe I should stay because I deserve it. I did something to deserve this. And that's one of the biggest hurdles you got to get them through. No, you don't deserve this. You do not. And this is not your fault. And now let's use some wisdom along with prayer and get the community workers, the ones who are professionals, because it takes all of us. And we're going to get the social workers and the therapists and the psychologists, and we're going to get everybody. Because unfortunately, a lot of times their children are involved as well. And so we remind them, okay, now your children keep saying you've been battered. Is this what you really want them to see? And then we began to make an exit plan, get them to feeling better about themselves. Yeah, I want to get out. And, you know, and then we get everyone involved, even law enforcement. And again, it starts a lot of times with that protective order. But unfortunately, in DC, Dr. Gigi, and Maryland, they failed a lot of people with those protective orders. One gentleman just last week, I think we had a situation where the gentleman went and killed the young lady, and then they stopped him on the highway somewhere and he killed himself in the car as the police was trying to accost him. So, and she had a protective order.
Right, right. Ms. Hogan, can you tell us about the effectiveness of protective orders? Because I think, you know, to Pastor Webb's point, people say, well, just get a protective order, but
Sure. You know, one of the things just to kind of piggyback off your previous question, one of the things that I often talk to my advocates about, but also my clients about, is that you are the expert in your life, and you are the expert in what this man will or won't do, or what this woman will or won't do. You've lived with them, you know what they're like. You tell me what's going to work for you. The protective order is ultimately a piece of paper, right? And so if you have an offender out there who isn't going to be mindful of law enforcement getting involved in their life, who doesn't care about the authority of court, it may not be helpful to you. Now, sometimes it's going to offer you, I mean, one of the really great things about orders of protection, and the reason that I'm grateful for them in the DB community, is that they're flexible and they can put some things in place in terms of establishing, you know, who has temporary custody, saying, hey, school, this person can't come around. So even though it may not stop all of the behavior, there are still often some things that are in place that are helpful. But we try to get a picture from someone in terms of, you know, what is that behavior like, right? When we're talking about power and control, it's a pattern of behavior. It's not an isolated incident. And so what does that pattern look like to you and to this other offender out there? And then we try to use that as the basis for our safety planning. So we often work with people where they may have, you know, social workers, friends, family, law enforcement who are like, well, they said I should get a protective order and that's enough. And we have to go back and use our own expertise a little bit to say, hey, let's talk about the real efficacy of this piece of paper and whether or not it's worth it for her. What are our other options and how do we go about getting there?
Yes.
I want to speak a little bit because maybe it helps to talk about the cycle of violence, because intervening, the timing of intervening or giving support so that an individual, if they elect to leave the relationship, is crucial. When I teach about domestic violence, I actually show 3 movie clips. One from Sleeping with the Enemy with Julia Roberts, because I think that that really does a great job of illustrating wealth and control, and how rich people can do the same. I also show the What's Love Got to Do with It? Because I don't know if you remember that scene where, you know, well, it's Angela Bassett playing Tina Turner, and she's with her girlfriends, and, you know, Ike is trying to, you know, produce a song or write a song, and she and her girlfriends are out by the pool, and they say, hey, come on, why don't you come out? And, you know that you've got to take a break or something. And he was high off of cocaine, and he shot her a look, and immediately she knew what that was going to do. So triggering events, right? And nobody knows, to your point, Ms. Hogan, the woman or the man, whoever's being victimized, knows what their triggers are. And then in no time at all, he's beating the tar out of her. And the children then are watching, right? And so you see these 3 poor little boys, and they're terrorized by seeing this. And then the other part is the remorse that comes afterwards. You see him buying this present. She's, in her bed. He leaves a present. So there is that cycle of violence where there is the walking on eggshells when you don't really know what's going to set the person off. And sometimes people don't understand that if there's alcohol or drugs involved, that the person might want to get the beating done before the person gets more drunk or more high, or before the kids get home from school. And then, of course, the explosion. And ironically, sometimes people say that they feel a sense of relief because it's over. And then there's the aftermath of the remorse. I promise I'll never do this. I'm so sorry. Why would you ever want to be with me? I'm worthless and all that. Now, everybody's a little bit different in terms of that cycle. And what we talk about is if it becomes more and more frequent, number one, or number two, drugs and alcohol are involved, or there are weapons, there can be an escalation. So Ms. Hogan, can you talk to us about that? Because really, of course, there is we want to educate people who, if they're in this situation, right? Because maybe there's somebody that's listening is in this situation, or if they know of somebody that's in that situation, that they don't want to cause more harm, right? They don't want to cause something that will actually get somebody killed. But what do you say for those of us that maybe trying to be helpful about that cycle? What are sort of the warning signs in that people should be careful of?
Sure. So I think that if you're friends and family and you're coming in, even if you're a helping organization that's coming in, it's always about taking your clue from the survivor and what they're asking for. And if they're saying no, not just with their mouth, but with their body language, with their eyes, with what they're doing, they're not calling you back, they're not following through on the plan, you've got to take it from faith that they know what they're doing. And I think, that's something that can be really, really frustrating. I think particularly for friends and family, and we see a lot, is that people wear out their chances to go through and ask for help. And it makes sense, everybody's got to have their own boundaries, and healthy boundaries is in many ways the antithesis of domestic violence. And you've got to know your own limitations in terms of helping someone over and over. I think that's why organizations like us are so necessary, because we don't necessarily have to scab over our feelings. We just have to be there, whether it's the first time or the 12th time. So I think, take your clues from the person. If they're not engaging, it's for a reason, and it's okay to let that alone. You're not letting someone down by stopping your intense help when they are not returning your calls and things like that. That's often for a reason. Um, I often also talk to people about, if you see some of the red flags early, that's a good moment to intervene before we're really starting about, really lethal or seriously harmful level of violence. So if your friend's like, oh, my boyfriend's so cute, he wants to look, he's always asking where I am and he wants to be with me all the time. Like, that's a good moment to say, I hear you that might feel really flattering, but how do you think that might feel 6 months from now? You didn't go out with me on my birthday because it was so important that you guys have your week anniversary. Just having those conversations early. I know that those can be hard and feel like they might harden a friendship, but sometimes it's worthwhile to speak up and say, I'm a little worried about this, because it just often doesn't lead someplace great.
My brother calls those pink flags, In retrospect, of course, they're probably red flags, but yes, that kind of togetherness. When I think of my ex-husband, it was overly, calling and checking in, but of course, it was like going shopping with me for clothes. This was after we were married, but that was just bizarre to me,
Well, I
everything.
think as a society, we sort of make love out to have started that way. If you look at a lot of pop culture references and things like that, that is kind of what we are taught is the ideal. And really, it does not go the direction that that Hollywood might make us think, it should go.
Yeah. Well,
Pastor Webb.
Yes, I believe, and from what I've seen over the years, it's a transition from love to control to then balance, because it always starts out. And one human thing that we all have in common, humanity, is that everyone wants to be loved, right? So you keep hearing all this, I love you, because all of the abusers have told people, I love you. Even in dealing with our clients, I worked in St. Elizabeth, working with people who were the perpetrators. And we're finding even their diagnoses were antisocial personality disorder, or they were narcissistic disorder. It's got to all be about them. It's about me, or borderline personality disorder. So they already had personality issues. And so when someone say they love you, but then they want to keep track of you 24/7, where are you going? And then, you can't be with your friends, you can't be with your family. That right there, that is an indicator that this love has really turned into control, and that will become valid. Now, sometimes it's been so frustrating, and Ms. Hogan, you said it, even in the church, because, you do have to draw a line, and you constantly, you hear these people, because it even crosses generations. So you have the grandmothers and the mothers coming, and I'm concerned for my child, that she's going to get killed. She won't leave this man. And so it's very challenging, because you're talking to them, you're talking to the child, then you're talking to the grandchildren. It's crossing all these generations. It's multi-generational, the impact is. And so it can become very challenging, because then she says, but he says he loves me. He said he didn't mean to hit me. He just had a hard day at work, or he got mad, or the kids didn't clean up like they were supposed to. And so then you have the mother coming back to you and saying, this girl, this is my child, but I'm really upset. And then they have arguments. So it's very challenging in the church, and it takes a lot of prayer. So one of the things we ask people too, when we first find out, we ask the victim, do you want to come out of this? Now, nobody's going to force you. We're here to help you. We're here to help you get an exit strategy. But do you want to come out of this? Because as you alluded to, Ms. Hogan, many of them, they keep going back. You get them out, they go back. You get them out, they go back. You get them out, they go back. And unfortunately, a lot of times it will be to their demise. Now, I want to say real quickly, Dr. Gigi, in your testament, I was thinking about a girl I grew up with, and even we had law enforcement. She worked for law enforcement. And so the law enforcement officer that she worked for was a lieutenant, but he happened to also be a pastor. And he told me, he said, when I heard the man's voice, so sometimes we can even hear it in a person's voice that they're controlling, that they're going to be abusive. And he heard it in his voice. And he said, he told her, if you ever want to break up with this man, do not break up with him without telling me. He was a lieutenant. Don't do it. And apparently she tried to do it. And this was years ago. Apparently she tried to do it. And he had to end up sending his squad to her place. And they went in there, and Miss Hogan, the gentleman, was in the bedroom. He come out the bedroom. He has blood all over him. They asked him, where is she? He says, in the kitchen. And there she was in the kitchen dead. And he had stabbed her so many times they couldn't even open her casket.
Oh,
so
my.
if she would have just listened, don't try to break up with them. But you can't force adults to do anything. And unfortunately, a lot of young teenagers now are in committed relationships, especially in the LGBTQ community. I've had a lot of them walk up to me at church, you know, can you pray for me? I want to talk to you. You know, I'm gay and, you know, I'm 17, I'm in high school, but my partner, you know, he's beating on me. So it's really, really real, and it's very challenging.
Well, I just want to commend Temple of Praise for having the openness and the acceptance so that LGBTQ youth feel that they can come to you. I think that, you know, as we're talking about if people want to leave these relationships, and it's complicated because there may be lots of reasons why people cannot leave. In my particular case, I knew, because I know about domestic violence, he was unemployed for a while. And I was worried that if I exited that would actually inflame. He also had weapons. And what he did was never did anything towards me, but he would destroy things, including, you know, at one time he went off. I wasn't even home. This was the strangest thing. And he put holes in the walls, you know, computers broken, all of that. And so it's a type of terrorism. And I was actually not even worried for myself. I was worried for my extended family because I knew that he didn't like them. So I had to be very, very careful in the exit strategy, right? Because I knew that there was the being inflamed. And I'm very open about this because I think I think I'm smart. And if this can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. And I just think that there is no shame in being open about that. But what are some of the helpful things that we can say to somebody that's in this situation? Because you said, Pastor Webb, it's not your fault. Ms. Hogan, is there any other phrases? Because I think sometimes when we are on the outside, you know, we're just stuck. And it's like when somebody has a death, we don't know what to say. But there are some things that are probably more helpful to say than others that are less helpful.
Yeah, I think, you know, I like reminding people that they're the expert. You know, people come to me and say, what should I do? And I say, well, let's go back. Like, you know this better than anyone else, because I think that's one of the things. They've been broken down. They need to be built up. I think what goes hand in hand with that is offering options and not solutions, right? Hopefully your options will be solutions, but the biggest thing is not making the choices for people. Well, you can come to my house and stay on the couch. Where do you think might be the best option for you to stay? Would it be something like a hotel? Do you think you'd be open to a shelter? Giving people the ability to make choices, which they're so denied of often in these relationships, is huge. Not only because it's going to let them select what's going to be most comfortable for them, but it's also about building back that esteem and that ability to do for yourself. I think the other really key one, and one that a conversation that I try to have with people, depending on kind of the amount of time we get to spend with them, is letting them know, hey, you know, if you make a decision that this isn't going to work and you're going to go back, you know, I'm worried about that choice. I'm worried about your safety there, but that doesn't mean I go away or I'm going to judge you when you come back, if you come back. You know, unfortunately, most people do. But when you come back, I'm still here. And it makes no difference to me that that wasn't successful. We can try again. because I think people get very embarrassed. I mean, that's one of the challenges I see people face is they reached out and then they backed out, and now they're ashamed to come back. And there is no, for people who do domestic violence work, there's no shame in that. We are ready for that. We are happy to see you again. Well, we're not happy, but we're glad you came back. And let's see where we can pick up from where we left off.
Yes, yes. And Dr. Gigi, something that we say, first of all, we say you're not alone. You're not alone. And we want you to know you're not alone. We're here for you. Whether you make a decision to go back or no, we're here for you. And of course, spiritually, we say, God loves you and we love you too. And we want you to love yourself. You are worthy. You are worthy of being treated kindly. You are worthy of being loved. And God loves you too. And so, because we don't want to demean them. We don't want to degrade them. They're already beaten down enough. And we certainly don't want to take their choices away from them, because that's one of the problems, right? They're under control. They're under another person's control. So they don't come to us to then end up in another controlling environment. No, we give them the opportunity to make their own choices.
Right. Well, a couple of things that women have said, I mean, survivors, again, it could be women or men, is that when one person validated them, how much that means. You don't deserve this. I care about what happens to you. You're not alone. It's not your fault. So these very simple phrases can go a long way. And the example I like to use actually is an example where this very affluent couple, highly educated, where he was beating her up and terrorizing her, were in New York City for a visit. And the woman said, oh, they were at a crosswalk and waiting for the light to turn. And the woman said, oh, look at that. Architecture is such and such. And he's like, no, that's wrong, blah, blah, blah. So this New Yorker, typical New Yorker, as she's crossing, she says, you're an idiot. She's right, and kept walking. But that validation is like, oh my God, I am right. He is an idiot. He's putting me down, right? That was what was sort of for her, that made a difference. And so you don't have to be, somebody that knows a person. I often say when I'm in the checkout line and there's the cashier or somebody, I'm like, hey, you look like you're having a hard day. Or that humanity, we never know. In the positive, we know how we can make people feel in the negative, but in the positive, how we can make a human being feel and to unburden them and to see them. In South Africa, the word for saying hello is, I see you. I see you. I see you, I see your humanity. I want to just switch a little bit and talk about kids, because when people have kids, that can make things that much more challenging. It's different when you're single. Not that it's easier, but the dynamics are different. So, Ms. Hogan, can you tell us about kids and what some of the statistics or the complications of child abuse and intimate partner violence, how do those feed into each other, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of overflow there. I think that the last time I looked at the statistics, it was about in 50% of the cases where there was domestic violence against a parent, there was also going to happen against the children. And I don't think that's just, certainly it's not just physical violence, but I think the other big thing is that when you talk about domestic violence and everybody wonders, like, how do you end it? How do we get past this? I think that's one of the huge places where growing up in these households can be such a disservice for people, because you learn your lessons about what love looks like and about what a relationship looks like in your home. And so, these lessons that this is what love looks like and how it plays out can be taught very early. And there, 100% people who are going to grow up in domestic violence situations who are going to say that wasn't right and I'm not doing that. But there are an equal amount who are going to say, well, this is what I was taught it was supposed to be, both on the side of someone who might be abusive, but also in terms of taking abuse and normalizing it to some extent. So I think that's really troubling. I think we also just see that there are long-term health impacts from growing up in the tension and the disruption that is often living in a situation with domestic violence. And then I think the other thing that's often discounted, particularly in that kind of why don't they just leave narrative, is the fact that if you have children together and you leave, you're not gone. You're tied to that other person as long as those children are going to be in both your lives. And so it takes a different level of safety planning around the fact that there is likely to be continued contact for an extended period of time. And I think there's a lot of pressure, rightfully so, to want to co-parent with people, to want to have kind of healthy parents on both sides being part of children's lives. But it also creates a lot of opportunities for control and manipulation for that abusive partner through the kids, even once people are out. So it certainly makes things complicated. It means you need more long-term safety planning. And unfortunately, it often means kind of, even if you're safely away, kind of manipulating you through the courts, manipulating you with whether or not you get childcare, sending nasty messages with kids, all that stuff that just makes it hard to enjoy and feel normal for a long time.
Yeah. And where you said something key, where there's child abuse, there's usually violence, usually against a woman, but not exclusively, and the reverse. So we should really be thinking of it as a family unit, and also how drugs and alcohol play a role.
Absolutely.
Because if you look, and Pastor, I know that when you were working at St. Elizabeth's, women who have problems with alcohol may be using it as a coping mechanism, not necessarily, I mean, it's still a problem. Alcohol is still a problem, but sometimes that gets lost when you're in a healthcare system, let's say. Can you speak to that, please? Because I know that you have not just your church experience, of course, as a pastor, but also in your work at St. Elizabeth's.
Yes. Well, of course, Dr. Gigi, in St. Elizabeth's, we dealt with perpetrators all the time, and some of them were women. We had a lot of high-profile cases of women. One in particular, she killed 5 of her children. Oh. So we have a lot of high-profile cases there. And of course, on the road to recovery, because we believe that you can recover. It may take a while, but you can recover, and you will. If you follow, what all the practitioners are telling you to do, you can get better. But we found too, Dr. Gigi, that when you start doing these cognitive behavioral therapy groups and you do individual therapy and you do one-on-one sessions, you find that a lot of these people, unfortunately, Dr. Gigi, they were suffering from PTSD as a result of being a kid in a home that was very violent. And so really what they did, they responded to their situations the same way they always saw it responded to in their own homes. And when you're in an impoverished area, as we know, and Rodham doing such a wonderful, marvelous job addressing healthcare disparities, nobody addressed that mental health issue. Nobody addressed that piece. And so unfortunately, then a lot of the spotlight came when someone has lost their lives. And so when you talk to these people who are perpetrators and you go back and you start, okay, let's think cognitively. Where did you begin? What started? We go all the way back to the timeline. And it almost always, 99% of the time, it was something that happened in their childhood that triggered it. They didn't get the proper help. And that's why it's so important when people are in these domestic violence situations, intimate partner situations with violence, that we remember these kids who are a part of that scenario. As I said earlier, it crosses the generations because we had some who also went in and killed the whole household, the mother, the father, anyone that was trying to intervene. And a lot of times they were very remorseful, and they really were remorseful. And you'd be so sad because you say, wow, if someone would have just reached out, if someone would have just tried to help you and get you the help that you needed from suffering from these mental health issues, then maybe lives could have been saved. And it's a very, very, very tragic scene. And the mother that killed her 5 children, it was just so tragic. And they found out, Dr. Gigi, not only was she suffering from PTSD, but she was overlooked because she had postpartum depression. And, you know, when you're in impoverished areas and you're going to the doctor and telling them you don't feel good and you're having these thoughts in your mind, we shouldn't dismiss that. We shouldn't.
Yes.
That's why we need wonderful doctors like you. We shouldn't dismiss that because
Mhm.
it's a snowball effect. And a
Yeah.
lot of that abuse comes from that. Don't ignore her when she said she, you know, hearing something in her head, or she just got
Yes.
depressed having these babies back to back to back and got overwhelmed.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so it's just so very sad.
Well, and you know, you touched on something that I think does not, you know, get enough attention. And that, first of all, we're living in a society that really glorifies violence. I mean, you know, I've got a great niece and a great nephew. They're not permitted to watch TV, but the children's programs, I mean, are just so much violence. And now we're coming up on Halloween, so there's a lot of blood and gore. But we don't talk a lot about the perpetrators of the violence and what programs there are for them. I remember, you know, when I was talking to my sister and I said, you know, I screen everybody for violence. She said, well, do you ever ask if somebody is perpetrating the violence? And I said, you know, no. So I started to ask that. And actually, that's when I picked up that some women are the ones that perpetrate the violence.
Yes.
But what is, I mean, what is there, Ms. Hogan? Are there programs? Are they found to be effective for people who perpetrate the violence? What do we know about that?
Yeah, so it's been a while since I've kind of delved deep in that. I do work predominantly on the side of helping kind of the survivors of the violence, but I know historically the results for a lot of the programs, even specially kind of designed programs, have not been super high. I think one of the biggest challenges that I see kind of in doing that work is almost like other addictions work. The first thing people have to come to is to recognize that they have a problem. And
Mhm,
so much of domestic violence is often, at least around perpetration, built around the idea that
mhm,
it's not my fault.
mhm,
You burnt dinner, so that's why I did this. I've been
mhm.
having a hard time here, so that's why I did this.
Right.
And so being able to come back on that and actually say, you know, no, actually, this isn't working is often kind of foreign to the whole idea of how people are committing domestic violence. So,
Mhm.
you know, I do think more research and more kind of support need to be there. And I think, you know, kind of speaking to Pastor Webb's background, like the idea that there's not the intervention, particularly when people are young, to try to catch these things early, to try to, you know, get the lessons in place before they're really kind of set in people's ways.
Yes.
So I think that is going to be a really interesting thing to look at over the next, you know, decade, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, as we
Yes.
start being more open in society and intervening younger. How do we get out? Does that make the difference that we're hoping?
Mhm.
Yes.
Pastor Webb, do you have programs at Temple of Praise that, well, that educate about domestic violence in general, but anything for the survivors and or the perpetrators?
Absolutely. Through community partnerships, we have various places that, you know, we have partnered with where we can send people. And of course, Bishop Staples himself owned some transitional homes. And when he owned transitional homes, sometimes we would take women in, you know, try to keep them safe. We had security there. Also, every year, Bishop dedicates one Sunday solely to domestic violence. They wear the ribbons, they distribute and disperse a lot of information. We give referrals, give the people the hotline numbers. And of course, across the pulpit, Bishop talks about it as well, you know, that even to the men, if you're having these anxiety, anger issues, you know, come and talk to one of the pastors, or we're here to help you. And if you don't want to talk to us, we have someone you can talk to. So there's several different avenues we use to try to mitigate you know, some of those problems when it comes to domestic violence. But the real challenge, Dr. Gigi, to tell you the truth, is when you look at Washington, D.C., and you know better now, you know, you can spit off those statistics, but I know the statistics are high now with the death rate. You look at all these kids, Dr. Gigi, a lot of PTSD is formulating in the hearts and the minds of these young people that they
Mhm.
aren't even planning on living past 18. And then
Mhm.
they see their classmates on the ground. Because a lot of these deaths that have occurred, these kids are outside when it happens. So they see their friend on the ground dead. They see their friend on the ground bleeding. These are images that you can't get out of your mind. And so that's why we really need to start being proactive as opposed to reactive, because especially for those in the medical profession, we know that it can have a lasting effect. It can. So these kids go outside, their friends get killed, they go in the house, their mom and their dad are cussing and fussing and fighting because they got anxiety. They don't know a way out. They really don't want to live in that poverty that they're in. They're trying to figure a way out. That creates a lot of anxiety and anger. So they see all of that in the home. And so it's a vicious, vicious cycle. And it takes all of us. It takes collaboration. It's not a simple solution, because many times they end up there because it's the really the balance becomes a culmination
Yes.
of a progressive, it's been progressive incidents. And the balance then becomes a culmination. And so it's not just a one-time answer. And statistically, they say 95%, of course, of the women are in domestic violence relationships, but 5% of the women. And one of the fastest growing populations in the prisons are women. Because women now are killing women in the LGBTQ community, as well as some women, they decide they aren't going to be battered any longer and they kill their husband or their partner. So it's just a vicious cycle. Well, this is a very important topic.
Well, hurt people, right?
Yes.
And then when you have weapons, that makes the people dying increases. But I've heard it say that violence is just the punctuation mark to an abusive situation. There's also another group that we haven't really talked about, and that is and this is the third movie that I show, and that's The Godfather. If you remember when the daughter it gets beaten up by her husband, because there is an intact family unit, Sonny goes and he beats him up, right? But of course they kill Sonny. But in situations, and I'll share with you my family member. So in Egypt, she her husband, who everybody warned her not to marry, but she did, and they had 3 kids in rapid succession, and they were living with their parents. As soon as the father died, the husband felt like he could do whatever. And so one time he beat the tarnation out of his wife, my cousin. In about 3 seconds, all of the men in the family were at the house and said, if you touch one hair on her head, you'll have to answer to us. But then they immigrated to the United States. Who's got her back then? And actually in Arabic, the term is, when you have men in the family, they're called your back, because that is your back. But here, and then he can say, you know what, I've got your passport, or I've got your papers if you don't do such and such. And then, of course, there's the added burden of bringing shame to a community, right? I mean, she happens to be Muslim, right? So, you see, that's what they do to their women if they speak about it. So there are so many layers. We didn't talk about the disabled community, there are so many subgroups, but ultimately, I want to sort of, and we've got 7 minutes left. We also touched about prevention. We talked about mental health in general that should be really embedded in whatever areas that we're in. We talked about guns and how gun violence, which of course we're seeing just go through the roof. And we're going to be screening a movie on gun violence October 27th. So please stay tuned for that. We talked about children who are in violent situations. We talked about educating young people about what those pink flags are. But Ms. Hogan, are there other strategies that you see that can really help on the prevention side?
Sure. I think speaking, to piggyback off of what, you both were just so eloquently talking about before, someone who's coming out of a domestic violence situation or possibly getting into one is a whole person. You don't come into it where suddenly, because there's domestic violence, everything else that was happening in your life was stripped away. And anything that might create barriers in your normal day-to-day life, poverty, housing instability, mental health concerns, substance abuse concerns, they are all going to compound on making it more difficult for people to get to safety and get to peace. And so I think a lot of, what maybe not be able to prevent it, but certainly would maybe make the violence lesser are things that I think are, people fight for in our society right now. Better health care, being able to spend more time with the physician, talk to them more fully, see the healthcare include your mental health and other things. Having access to affordable housing so that people aren't ending up doubled or triple up or saying, oh, this wonderful person said that I could stay at their house for a while because I was, out there. The things that make people vulnerable are the things that lead to violence, unfortunately. A lack of people with disabilities being able to feel well cared for and independent in the community. So I think anything we can do to make people more whole and well cared for people are also going to help cut down on some of these incidents of violence, or at least the need for people to stay in the violence any longer than they absolutely have to.
Yes.
And let's not forget food as the number one social determinant of mental health, right? Pastor, what are your thoughts, your closing thoughts, as we have 4 more minutes?
Yes, when we talk about prevention, Dr. Gigi, I wanted to mention real quickly, they have that Cardiff model. It's called the Cardiff model that was created by Dr. Jonathan Shepherd, but he's a surgeon and a professor in a university in the United Kingdom. And so Ryder made me want to look at that model because they have a toolkit how to prevent violence, because it's a multi-agency approach to violence prevention. And Ms. Hogan, you might want to look at it too. And it relies on the strategic use of information from health and the law enforcement organizations to improve policing and community balance and all of that. And I think that's what we have to, what we're doing tonight. We're taking a multidisciplinary approach. And certainly we need the spiritual leaders involved, such as myself and, my bishop. We need spiritual leaders because we believe in the power of prayer, because we got to keep praying. We got to keep praying. We can never stop praying. But the Cardiff model, Dr. Gigi, it's sort of like it does mapping. It begins to do mapping and the cores and where things are happening and try to then address it, the primary approach for that violence prevention. And that hopefully we can, once we start peeling that onion back in those layers, and we may have to cry, just like when we cut up the onion, it may cause us some tears, but at least we're trying to get to the core and pull back a lot of the layers so we can be more effective and have a more wholesome society that kids won't be afraid to grow up.
As usual, Pastor Webb, I always learn something when I'm speaking with you. I have to look that up because I don't know about that. But what you're sort of emphasizing is that it is multidisciplinary, that these problems don't come overnight. And of course, we in the comments, we focus sort of on people who don't have the resources, but there's also a lot of pressure on richer folks now to stay in relationships because they don't necessarily want to give up some of the perks or the fine. We know that when women get divorced, what happens to their life, their financial health, it goes down the tubes. There are all kinds of other motivations. And then, as we said, it's the psychological trip that a person is going through, right? Violence, as I think one of the people talk about, being in a violent relationship is like being a POW, right? Sometimes the captor can be very kind with you, but then you just never know, sort of what's going to come next. Ms. Hogan, let's have you have the final word. Can you tell us about your organization as well? And because this has just been such a rich discussion, we could talk for much longer.
Absolutely. So as I said, I'm with DC Safe. We are celebrating, oh goodness, now that I'm on the spot, it's our 15th or 16th year of service.
Wow.
We are actually about to have our annual gala on Thursday. So if anybody's looking for a fun event Thursday night, check out our website and come out. And we really focus on being low barrier. We meet people where they are and try to provide them what they need based on that. Provide a safety net, almost a little bit of the ER of domestic violence services, and then start working on building up those other relationships for people as they go.
Well, ladies, I'd like to thank you both. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for being inspiring and helpful and caring human beings, strong and smart, and just a pleasure to have you both on the panel tonight. And we'll make sure that we share this video. It's going to be on our web as part of our speaker series. And we also want to share some of the information. I'll try to do some follow-up on the Cardiff model as well. So with that, I'd like to thank Pastor Webb and Ms. Hogan from DC Safe, from Temple of Praise. And until next time, I'm Dr. Gigi Ilbayumi from the Rodham Institute. And before I sign off, I'd like to thank Ms. Ashanti Carter, who is the program manager and puts all of these wonderful programs together, Ms. Christina Williams, who's the Director of Community Engagement, and Ms. Tracy Bass, who's the head of our Doctors of Tomorrow program. So take care, everybody. Please stay safe and take care of yourselves.
Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye. Thank you.